All for one and one for all. This classic calls for its own band of musketeers to come to its aid. This edition of the Three Musketeers has been a steadfast companion to countless readers over the years, carrying them through Dumas's thrilling adventures of loyalty, courage, and friendship. Its once proud binding now bears the scars of time, but the spirit of the book remains unbroken. Much like D'Artagnan's journey to prove himself among the musketeers, this book stands ready for transformation. Its pages, though still securely held, cry out for the protection they deserve. The binding and once noble armor will be carefully mended to ensure it can continue to safeguard the story within. Today marks the beginning of a restoration journey that will honor not just the physical book, but the enduring legacy of the tale itself. Together, we'll ensure that this literary treasure remains as bold, resilient, and timeless as the story it contains, ready to inspire new generations of readers for years to come. The first part of the conservation process is, of course, dry cleaning. I remove the surface dirt from the pages to avoid fixing it during one of the later treatments. Loose dirt tends to accumulate deep in the folds, so I brush it out with a soft brush. On several pages, there are small clumps on the surface that I can gently lift off with a blunt scalpel. I'm not exactly sure what they consist of. Perhaps someone was eating crackers over the book and didn't clean up the crumbs before closing it? Who knows? The exterior is also cleaned with a smoke sponge, since the outside is more exposed to dirt. The smoke sponge is excellent for removing grime that is slightly more embedded in the surface. To stabilize the text block, all the tears in the pages need to be repaired. I carefully go through each page, and whenever I find a tear, I stabilize it with a patch of Japanese koso paper applied with wheat starch paste. I tear the patch into shape to ensure long fibers along the edges and apply paste to it. The patch is then brushed onto the tear to hold it together and left to dry. While it dries, I place a layer of non-worn polyester and a sheet of blotter paper on either side, topped with a weight bag. The weight bag prevents the patch from warping during drying. The blotter paper absorbs moisture from the paste, and the polyester ensures that the blotter paper doesn't stick to the patch. Each tear is reinforced with a patch on both sides. I also stabilize the most pronounced folds in the pages in the same way as the tears. However, since these areas aren't torn, I only stabilize them on one side. Some of the corners don't have tears, but they tend to split instead. I use the tip of my dentist tool to locate the vulnerable corners and apply a small amount of wheat starch paste into the splits to stabilize them. When all the tears in the text block are stabilized, I trim the excess koso paper so the patches are aligned with the edges of the pages. I place a small piece of cardboard between the pages to prevent accidental cuts and use a sharp scalpel to trim the patches. It would be a real hassle to cut the patches precisely to fit the edges of the pages from the start, so I intentionally make them slightly oversized and trim them afterward. This way, I can be sure the tears are fully repaired right up to the edge. Before I can repair the book's binding, I need to consolidate the paper lining on the spine and the head and tail bands. I do this by applying wheat starch paste between the layers and gently press the bands and then the spine lining into place. This step is crucial, not only to prevent them from detaching in the future, but also because they would take up too much space when I fill in the binding material if they aren't properly aligned with the spine. During the drying process, I hold the text block together with a couple of clamps. I place a layer of non-woven polyester and a sheet of blotter paper on top, followed by weight bags that conform to the spine's curve, ensuring that everything stays in place as it dries. If you look closely, you will notice that the back cover is misaligned with the book, and I can't immediately reposition it. The end paper on the text block should align with the one on the cover. The cloth attaching it is completely stiff, so I soften it by applying a water-based gel. After a moment of patience, the cloth begins to loosen and I can move the cover into the correct position where it's left to dry. I want the cover to be properly aligned before I do the infill of the binding material, because it would be very frustrating to create a straight infill if the surface it's applied to is crooked. To fill in the missing part of the spine's binding material, I've selected a new piece of leather that closely matches the original color. However, leather is far too thick when purchased, so I need to pare it down first. It shouldn't be uniformly thin. It's important to taper it toward the edges to create a seamless transition between the old and new material. I use an old lithographic stone as a surface when paring because it provides a hard but gentle base for my paring knife. Before attaching the infill, I lift the old leather from the covers so I can insert the new piece underneath. I also remove any small clumps of cardboard material to prevent bulges when everything dries. I apply witch dust paste to the infill several times to ensure it adheres properly. I've also made a hollow bag from acid-free cardboard, which is placed onto the leather, and both the leather and the hollow bag are transferred to the book. The leather is secured to the covers underneath the original binding material, and wrapped around the covers and hollow bag at the head and tail cap. Finally, the original material is adhered over the infill, still using witch dust paste, but this is a much drier paste. I tested the original leather to ensure it could handle moisture. If it had been too deteriorated, it wouldn't have withstood it. Nevertheless, I want to introduce as little moisture as possible, just to be safe. I must admit, I hadn't filled a leather spine since my student days, so it was a bit nerve-wracking to do it again, but it was also very satisfying and enjoyable to work with leather once more. The entire book is wrapped in nonwoven polyester and blotter paper and left to dry for about a week. There are small loose fragments of the remaining binding material, which I consolidated with witch dust paste. I had hoped to fill in the missing sections of the paper binding as well, but the attached parts were very firmly secured, and I determined that attempting to lift them for infilling would only risk causing further damage. The final step in stabilization is reinforcing the folds of the end papers. In some areas, multiple layers of paper are simply folded, so I first smooth them out by slightly moistening the paper with the same witch dust paste I used to secure them in place. Additionally, I reinforce the folds with a layer of Japanese koso paper, also applied with witch dust paste. The end papers are left to dry with a piece of nonwoven polyester and blotter paper placed in the folds to prevent them from sticking together. After drying, the excess paper is trimmed, similar to how I handle the tear repairs. However, since these are located deep within the folds, I don't use a cardboard piece for protection. Instead, I glide the scalpel carefully along the edge of the paper. With every meticulous step, this edition of the Three Musketeers has been carefully restored, its story safeguarded for future readers. What was once a fragile and worn book now stands renewed, with each element strengthened and united once more. The binding, which had come loose with time, is now secure, holding the pages together as it was originally intended. Tears and splits, no matter how small, have been mended with respect for the book's history and structure. Even the vulnerable folds and delicate corners have received the care they needed to withstand the test of time. Just as the Musketeers themselves triumphed through loyalty and determination, this book's restoration has been a journey of dedication and precision. Each repair, each stabilizing touch echoes the spirit of all for one and one for all. Together, the materials now stand stronger than ever, ready to weather the future without losing sight of the past. It's a reminder that books are more than just pages and bindings. They are vessels of history and imagination. By preserving this copy of the Three Musketeers, we ensure that it continues to carry its story forward, inspiring readers with tales of courage, friendship, and adventures for years to come.